This is the story of the Sepoy Mutiny, otherwise known as the Indian Rebellion of 1857 to 1858. In order to understand the rebellion, it is important to know the history that led to this key event in the East Asian land known as India. The British East India Company, a facet of British economic imperialism, was present in India in the 1600s. Through this company, Britain established the trading posts at Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. However, it is important to note that the Mughals were in control of India at this time, not the British. However, it wasn't long before the individual states of India began to pull away from the Mughal Empire. 50 years later, the natives of India allied themselves with the French in a fight against Great Britain. This man, Robert Clive, led his troops of Sepoys, or Indian soldiers in the British East India Company Army, to victory against the French and Indians, and thus the East India Company became the leading power in India. This, of course, made Queen Victoria very happy, for you see, India was considered the jewel in the crown. With its large population, numbering in the hundreds of millions, and seemingly unlimited amounts of raw materials, India was highly prized for its potential. Its many valuable crops included cotton, indigo, and tea, as well as opium, with which Great Britain would trade in China. In addition to reaping the benefits of raw materials, the British built infrastructure to aid the economic growth in India. They built roads and bridges, telegraph and telephone cables, and railroads. In fact, India hosted the third largest network of railroads in the world at the time. In 1857, the British East India Company boasted more than 200,000 sepoys in its army. Within the army, the British reinforced the strict caste system of traditional Indian culture. This was not the only method of division. Sepoys also differed in religious practices. Some were Hindus, others were Muslim, and still some were Sikhs. However, one thing in particular bonded all of the Indian soldiers: the fear of British Christians obliterating their culture and religions. Many were afraid that the missionaries from Great Britain would force them to convert to Christianity and thus become unwelcome in their homeland. There were other factors that led to uneasiness within the Sepoy division of the East India Company Army. In the 1850s, regulations regarding payment and safety changed, and not for the better of the Indians. The British began to pay their inferior mercenaries less and placed them in more dangerous situations. In July of 1856, the British passed the General Service Enlistment Act. This piece of legislation required that all sepoys must be able and willing to fight, not only in their respective territories within India, but also overseas. Sepoys, therefore, were forced to fight on behalf of the British in altercations not involving India. This decree severely upset the sepoys. However, the spark that ignited the Sepoy Mutiny was one fired from a new gun. In 1853, the British unveiled its new weapon, the pattern 1853 Enfield rifle. This gun was particularly innovative because of its pre-greased cartridges. These paper cartridges were ready to unload into the Enfield rifle after a soldier simply bit off the wrapping. The issue here was not the new gun, but the substance with which the paper cartridges were greased. By January of 1857, sepoys heard rumors that the magazine's cartridges were greased with lard from cows and pigs. This was a problem, a big religious problem. If the rumors were true, Hindu sepoys would end up having to bite off a cartridge soaked in tallow made from cows, and Muslim sepoys would have to bite off cartridges soaked in tallow made from pigs. To those who practice Hinduism, cows are sacred, and to those who practice Islam, pigs are unclean. Therefore, the sepoys would have to forfeit their religion in order to serve in the British Army. And in fact, those who had already used the new rifles and unknowingly bit off the paper cartridges were doomed to face exile into the lowest caste, the untouchables. It is rumored that several British officers were not aware of this issue. So when most of the Sepoys refused to use the new rifles, the British understood them to be deviants and threw them in jail. But it didn't take long for the problem to unfold. The British quickly tried to remedy their actions, but to no avail. They could not stop the Indian Rebellion. On May 10th of 1857, a large number of Sepoys marched to Delhi, the capital city of India. There they joined other Sepoy forces in a combined combative effort to overthrow British rule. The rebellion quickly spread to northern and central India. The fighting was fierce and bloody. The British struggled for an upper hand. However, internal disputes within the Sepoy army ultimately resulted in a British victory. The Great Rebellion ended on June 20th, 1858. The Indians lost their first war for independence. However, it was a loss for the East India Company as well. Queen Victoria and Parliament thought it best if India were controlled directly than through an economic method. This decision ushered in the era of the Raj, in which the British directly controlled India, and more specifically, the British Crown, through a royally appointed viceroy, controlled India. This form of imperialism, known as direct control, greatly increased the power of the British living in India. Racist attitudes also increased, as the British no longer viewed the Indians as capable comrades, but as inferior, unreliable pagans. The Indians, of course, no longer trusted the British to have the best interests for India at heart. Another effect of the Sepoy Mutiny was a great increase in Indian nationalism. Two groups in particular rose to the forefront of Indian politics. In 1885, the Indian National Congress was formed, and in 1906, the Muslim League was created. These two nationalist-minded assemblies proposed and effectively worked towards self-government in India. The final effect of the Indian Rebellion was the partitioning of land. In 1906, the British designated Bengal in India to be the home of both Muslim and Hindu Indians. However, the two religious factions were separated from each other. So, Bengal was divided between Muslims and Hindus. This act was eventually reversed in such a way as Bengal was partitioned in another manner. The Mutiny of Sepoys from 1857 to 1858 significantly altered the way of life for many Indians. The British remained the dominant force throughout Asia and much of the world. However, the Indians should not be discounted as weak. On the contrary, the Indian Rebellion proved that Indians were fiercely proud of their culture. This mutiny not only showed that the British were vulnerable, but it also showed that imperialism was not a perfect system. Empire was on its way out the door, for across the world, imperialized peoples rose to prove their worth and desire for liberty.